All right, so I was thinking about our identity, and an old mentor of mine once told me about the concept of a false self and a true self. He said there's really two parts of us. There's always a true self. It's the ultimate self or the potential self that we could be, a perfect self, and then there's a false self. And within each of us is like we're part of that. We're somewhere in between. A part that we don't want to be and a part that's not us, and then there's a part that ultimately we could become as we keep growing. And that kind of struck me because I realized, it kind of gives you a goal, or at least something to look forward to in terms of where you're going with your life, or what you're doing. As a Christian, I think back about the Garden of Eden and the fall of man, and I think that would be the first introduction of the false self. And you get a divide instantaneously there. If Adam and Eve hadn't sinned at the very beginning, then they would maintain their true selves and continue to grow in that manner. And you can see how that's a hypothetical world that doesn't exist, but potentially could. And I think ultimately, with Christ coming back and returning and giving us the ability to see God and be a part of God and learn from Him, I think we can start reestablishing the true self within us. And I think that's a really powerful concept. When I think about how that actually occurs, I think that the identity transformation comes from truth, from understanding truth, from living truth, from hearing truth. It's not something that one day you just try really hard and then, bam, you're better, or you've made another step in the right direction. It's kind of something that you realize, or something that comes upon you. It's a process, and it's always related to something that is better, like love is a truth. Truth as not just a fact, but truth as what it really should be, an intention, I guess, of the Creator. There's some languages that have a different concept of truth than we have. I forget what language it is. I think it's Greek, that thinks of truth as a verb. It's something that you live out, you act out, and through that, you establish, I think, more of what the true self is, or as opposed to the false self. I think all of us are born as children, and ultimately and more of our false self, and as we get older, we become more of our truth self as we mature, and everyone's at different levels in that process. And then when I think about how that applies to my life, if I want to follow this concept of a true self, you can really think of it as a purpose or an accomplishment or a potential that you could achieve. But I think ultimately that may not be the most healthy approach to it, or the most healthy perspective. If you view it as an accomplishment, it becomes a stressful thing that you chase after and you want to be at, and if you don't have it, you're uncomfortable. I think a better perspective to look at it is about wholeness. It's not necessarily something that you go to as the end purpose, but as the journey along the way. It's just becoming more whole, and wholeness isn't something that's just like the end point. Okay, you've achieved it, there you have it. It's something that you just become and you form into. And thinking of it that way kind of takes the stress off of it. Instead, you live in a peace as you approach that. And the other issue, I think, when you think of things as accomplishment, is the issue of thresholds. Like, at what point, do you achieve true self? And like, bam, okay, I got this. You can always do more accomplishments. You can always do more good things because the world is limitless. So instead of thinking of it in terms of a purpose in and of itself to achieve, thinking of it just becoming whole then becomes a day-to-day process to live in. And then if you think of yourself then as becoming the true self as a process, then you can think of yourself as an expression of the true self. And that becomes a very powerful concept because, I think ultimately, since we're created beings, we are expressions of God. We are expressions of a source. And those expressions are not, these isolated things that God made you, and they're just completely isolated and independent. But rather, they're these expressions that can intertwine and connect, and each one of them is unique and individual. So I think, walking in the process of being an expression is really unique to the individual, and just finding who you are, finding who yourself is. Some people say it poetically, like, we're all singing a song, and which part is your harmony, which part is your piece that you're going to be a part of. And I think that's a really good way to think of it, because it takes away, again, that stress of accomplishment. Again, it's about being who you are, being your true self. When you're living that out, you really want to think, how that interrelates with other people and relationships and expressions. And that's where I really think about the power of abiding. In the Bible it talks about abiding in God. We can easily relate one to another, but we're also to relate with the Creator. And so again, that is a process. That's not an accomplishment or an end goal. And it's about the journey. And as Christians, we wonder about abiding and what that means in the Bible. And for me, lately on my heart, it's been one of the most powerful concepts. I've been thinking about it, praying about it. What does that mean, and how does that work? And we understand we have great power in abiding. It says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And, that's a hard concept to take in. It puts so much more weight on what it means to abide in our lives. I think it goes back to the expression thing I was talking about. We're meant to be expressions, but being expressions in isolation, what good is that? I think we're not just to be expressions one to another, but in God. And that's where the abiding comes from. Because your identity changes every day in every part of your life, and how you feel and how you act and so forth. Having that relationship with God in a consistent, regular fashion, which is basically what abiding is. It means to remain, to live in. In the Bible, if you do a word study on abiding, you'll find the word abide usually means to live, as in a physical place, like I'm going to abide here, or I'm going to abide there. And to abide in the Lord is saying, I'm going to live in the Lord. It's that process. Again, it's not an end goal, but it's something that you are, that you do, and that you just grow in. And it's a really powerful thing. And I think, it's about the journey. It's not about the end. It's about relationship. It's about remaining. It's about abiding.